people, out there in the streets with the people, and explaining to people exactly what had happened with our family, with the Move 9, and getting them to question how in the world could 9 people be charged with and convicted of killing one cop with one gun from one bullet. Mm-hmm. Not only that, I forgot to mention this. Within hours of my family's arrest, the city of Philadelphia completely demolished our home, the 2 houses, 307, 309, North 33rd Street, where all of this took place, completely demolished it. Now, this was the scene of the crime. You know, it was the scene where a cop was killed. Since when do you destroy evidence, destroy the scene of the crime within hours, you know, after the situation? They preserve evidence, not destroy it. Bring out their little yellow evidence tape and cordon it off and don't let nobody near it and all that stuff. They didn't do that. They demolished it. Now, how do you go to trial after destroying the evidence? Right. But anyway, we were explaining all of this to people, you know, that the destruction of evidence, the 1 bullet and 9 people, and also the trajectory of the bullet, how the cop was shot on a downward angle with the bullet traveling on a downward angle, and how Move people were in the basement, you know, making it physically impossible for Move people to have done it. And people were seeing it. They were getting it like, what? How is that possible? And we encouraged people, and they were doing it. We encouraged them to contact the city council people, the state representatives, state senators, U.S. representatives, U.S. senators, you know, contact everybody and make them answer those questions. We're not lying. Everything we're saying is documented. You can go through public records and see everything that we're saying, you know, make them explain it. So that was putting a lot of heat, a lot of pressure on these officials because, you know, I guess Rizzo thought that he could just go in there, make his attempt to kill Move people, and that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. Also, you know, when those cops went out there on August 8th of 78, during the trial of the Move 9, these cops testified that they could not see in the basement, that they had put tear gas in the basement, and that it was, you know, a hot August day, so you had the humidity, and the fire department, they had the fire department put in tons of water in that basement. It was almost 6 feet of water in that basement from deluge hoses, the fire department's deluge hoses. Then they put tear gas in there, so not only was it dark, but it was, you know, very smoky, and the air was real heavy from the water and the gas. The cops testified that they couldn't really see into the basement, but they emptied their guns, reloaded, and emptied their guns again in corners where they heard babies crying. You know, that's how, like, they could tell basically where somebody was. And they shot in corners where they heard babies crying. Anyway, it wasn't the end of Move. You know, we were still out there in the street informing people about our family and what was going on and how it really is a conspiracy against Move, you know, because there was nothing honest or right or even legal by their standards, you know, of what they were doing to Move. None of it was, you know, right. And people were seeing it. So these officials were under, you know, pressure, and the pressure was gaining. So, you know, finally they did what they always do. Rather than do the right thing and do what was necessary to release, Move people from prison, either through appeal and overturning the conviction and sentencing or whatever, changing it to time served and releasing our people, whatever. We didn't care how they did it as long as they released our people. And that's, what we were pushing. Well, they weren't going to do that. Rather than do the right thing, they decided that what they needed to do was to shut us up, to get rid of us once and for all. And that's what the May 13th bombing was about. Wilson Goode himself, the first black mayor of Philadelphia, he was mayor at the time, he made a public statement. He said it. He said he wanted a permanent end to MOVE. He didn't want MOVE people being arrested and going to prison, for a few months, a few years, and then getting out. He wanted a permanent end to MOVE. Now, that's what the first black mayor of Philadelphia said. And that is what the May 13th bombing was about. They had worked for over a year planning their attack on MOVE people on Osage Avenue. They practiced blowing up a simulation of our roof. They admitted to that. It came out that they had made a model of our roof and practiced blowing it up, that they had gotten 37.5 pounds of that military explosive C4, which no Philadelphia or no city police department has. Only the federal government has it, and they got it from the FBI, from the federal government, 37.5 pounds of C4. And their plan was to kill, to be done with MOVE once and for all. Understand, these cops and officials were pissed off that no MOVE people were killed in the 1978 attack and that a cop was killed and several other cops and firefighters were injured because them cops went crazy shooting that day. But they were pissed off about it, and they wanted, revenge. They were determined to do in 85 what they failed to do in 1978, which is why they came out there the way they did in 85. Now, they told people through the media that the attack took place because of some complaints from neighbors, that neighbors complained about us.
Correct.
I don't even have to burn my energy, going back and forth about whether neighbors complained about us, because it don't matter. The bottom line is, just like I asked in 78, when did this government start caring about, poor people, particularly black folks, living in, substandard housing? It doesn't make sense. It just don't wash. They came out there because they were determined to do in 85 what they failed to do in 78, and they were looking real bad because they could not substantiate, putting our people in prison for a crime they knew our family didn't commit. They came out there on, actually, on Mother's Day, Sunday, May 12th of 1985. That's when they began their attack. Now, people should understand this, too. They came out there with 4 warrants, a warrant for me and a warrant for 3 of my sisters and brothers. They knew that there were other adults in that house, and they particularly knew that there were children in that house. Several plainclothes cops who were on the surveillance detail had been on the MOVE surveillance detail out there on Osage Avenue a couple of years, and 2-3 years, maybe 4 years. they knew us, and they came up on our steps, knocked on our door, and me and my sister Teresa, who was killed in the bombing, came out, and we stood there talking to these cops for about an hour, giving them information, telling them what the issue was and asking them what were they doing, all around the back of our house. And, I mean, we stood out there talking to them cops for at least an hour, maybe a little more. 2 weeks later, and they just walked away. We talked to them, and they left. We went back in the house. 2 weeks later, on May 11th, one of the cops that we were talking to goes to a judge, Lynn Abraham, the same judge who had signed warrants against MOVE in 1978 that led to the August 8th attack in 78. They go to her home claiming that she's the emergency judge, and they go to her home because it was on a Saturday, May 11th, to get her to sign emergency warrants for them to, come out basically to kill her. Now, the thing is, the incident in the warrant happened 2 weeks earlier. 2 weeks. What made this an emergency? That they had to go to the emergency judge. What made it an emergency? It was 2 weeks old, and it really wasn't no incident. They charged me and my 3 sisters and brothers with terroristic threats and several other things I can't even remember right now. But when you're feeling terroristically threatened, do you stand there on somebody else's property, somebody else's steps, talking to them for an hour?
Right.
I mean, it's ridiculous. But they didn't have anything to justify the attack that they planned, so they had to come up with something, and that was the only thing I guess they could think of. So they got this judge who hated MOVE anyway, Lynn Abraham, who later became District Attorney Lynn Abraham. They got her to sign the warrants, and they, used that as their excuse to attack MOVE in 85 and, shoot thousands of rounds of bullets at us and drop that bomb on us, killing 11 of my family members and numerous animals. 5 babies, 6 adults, and numerous animals were murdered that day. And not just behind the thousands of bullets that were fired or the thousands of pounds of water pressure from those 4 fire department deluge hoses that they, aimed at us in our home, or the tear gas, but because they dropped that bomb on the roof of our home with no notice or anything at all. The bomb ignited a fire. The firefighters who had poured thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of water in our house with those deluge hoses, at the point, when there was no fire, I have to add, when the bomb ignited a fire, they decided that they weren't going to put water on the fire. They were going to let it burn. They made a conscious decision to let the fire burn. Now, I ask anybody in your listening audience, since when, what example can you give me of firefighters ever going out to a fire and letting it burn, making a decision to let it burn? That's even with an empty building.
The building, right.
But a building that men, women, children, babies, animals are in. When have they ever made a decision to let a fire burn like that?